Live.
We're live. So hello and welcome. Welcome if you're just joining me. My name's Jnanavaca, for those of you who don't know me. So welcome to, I think it's our final sort of talk of the retreat, although not our final evening. Tomorrow is our final evening. And yeah, I'll maybe say a little bit more. But yeah, lovely if you've joined me. Who's here, Seb or Hippolyte?
So we've got 70 people.
70 people already, right?
And Sajna says hello.
Hi there, Sajna.
Anne Chod says good evening.
Hi there, Anne.
We have Felicity and Chloe also saying hi.
Hello, Felicity and Chloe. That's nice.
We've got Akashi Mitra with us.
Oh, lovely, Akashi Mitra. That's great you're here. That's lovely.
Simon Hawksworth.
Hi there, Simon.
Jasenka Horvat says good evening from New Barnet.
Who's coming in from New Barnet?
Jasenka Horvat.
Jasenka from New Barnet. So I was not born, but I was raised in East Barnet, just down the road from New Barnet. So New Barnet is, or Barnet was my sort of stomping ground. Yeah.
We've got Richie with us saying hi.
Hello, Richie. Lovely to have you here.
Harvey Montague and Alex Wilding.
Ah, great to have you, Harvey and Alex. That's fantastic. I've just been brought a coffee. I don't know if you saw Dianata creeping in, but that's my after dinner coffee. So I don't suppose you'll mind me finishing my meal as I speak. So I'm joined today by a very illustrious crew. First of all, there's Guillaume, and then there's the rest of Jnanavaca, which is my community, the community that I live in. So come on in. So Amla Yodin's just arriving a little bit late, and Dianata's arriving a little bit late, but that's because they've been washing up, no doubt. So do you want to all wave? It'd be nice to come and just say, come and all wave, all in one go. Go on. So there's Seb and Maitreya Bandhu and Hippolyte and Parama Bandhu and Matt and Guillaume and Amla Yodin and David and Sanjay and Dianata. All of us from my community, and then Guillaume. That was the late Dianata. Anyway, so yeah, we normally have a community evening once a week, and this is our community evening, so they've very kindly joined us. And anyway, if you've been following the retreat throughout the week, in these evening talks, we've been talking about the meaning of various aspects of the Dharma, and tonight I've been asked to talk about the meaning of wisdom. So I'm going to be talking about the meaning of wisdom. And I think it was Tuesday night, that I was last talking to you. And then I was talking about the meaning of love. And so what I thought I'd do is talk about the same story that I talked about on Tuesday night, which is a true story, but this time from the perspective of wisdom, because wisdom and love are twin aspects of the enlightened mind. They're said to be inseparable. They're sort of not two, but nor are they some sort of mushy one. They are nevertheless distinguished in Buddhism. Wisdom is jnana or prajna, and it's a direct, non-conceptual seeing into the way things are, into reality, into truth, and it's a seeing that liberates. And it's said that one of the things it liberates, as well as a tremendous amount of joy and bliss and energy, is love. It liberates the heart to love. And that liberation of the heart is then translated into how an enlightened being functions in the world, how they act. And that acting in the world is what we know of as compassion. We don't really know what it's like from the inside of the enlightened mind. At least I don't. But how we experience it from the outside is as somebody dedicating their whole being to helping others, helping alleviate suffering in the world. Compassion. Anyway, so wisdom and love, wisdom and compassion, maybe I'll use the terms interchangeably, they're inextricably bound. And one without the other sort of means that the other's not present. If there's just love and compassion without wisdom, then it's not enlightened love and compassion. It's good, of course, but it's not enlightened love and compassion. And if there's just sort of wisdom but no altruistic, compassionate, loving dimension, then it's not enlightened wisdom. It might be some sort of partial seeing of how things are, but it's certainly not enlightened wisdom. Enlightened wisdom, enlightened compassion, inseparable. So that's what I'm going to be talking about this evening. So yeah, let me begin again with the story that I told on Tuesday. I'll tell it slightly. Well, it's the same story, but from a slightly different angle. I perhaps won't spend as long on it as I did on Tuesday. But I do want to have that story somehow as the illustration of both wisdom and enlightened compassion. And partly I want to do that because stories move us, or this story moves me, in a way that concepts seldom do. I mean, concepts can excite us into action, but stories somehow move us. And wisdom, it's really, really important that we understand that wisdom isn't an intellectual realization. It involves the cognitive, it involves a sort of knowing, but not as we think of the intellect, which is a juggling of concepts. Wisdom goes way beyond that, and it involves the whole of us. So you could say wisdom is, in a sense, more to do with a heart knowing than a head knowing. It's a sort of heart knowing. And stories sometimes resonate in the heart and maybe go deeper in that regard. So you'll remember, if you were here on Tuesday night, the protagonist of this true story is a Tibetan monk, Lama, yogi, called Lama Jigme Khalsang. And Lama Jigme Khalsang lived in the 19th century. He was born, I think, in the later part of the 18th century, and he died in the 19th century. And this story takes place in the 19th century, not in Tibet, but in a village, a small, out-of-way village in China. But before we get to that village, Lama Jigme Khalsang spent many years, we're told, meditating on solitary retreat, as it were. I guess he wouldn't have had the same concept of retreat as we do, but on his own, in caves, in mountains in Tibet, probably. And you know, when I do a solitary retreat, I normally do it for a matter of weeks. I have done a longer one for a matter of months. But for somebody like Lama Jigme Khalsang, it would have been like years spent in mountain caves, you know, probably above the snow line. And we're told that one of the practices, or when I say we're told, I'm basing the story on Vasantra's book, which I held up last week. Can you see this book? It's called Tales of Freedom, Wisdom from the Buddhist Tradition, by a man called Vasantra. And it's a wonderful book. I think it's both a sort of wise book, but it's also an enchanting book. What Vasantra does is he takes stories from the Buddhist tradition and then tells them very beautifully, and then brings out teachings in a way that I'm attempting to do, but he does it very eloquently. And this is one of the stories, the tales in this book. Beautiful tiger on the front of the book. So one of the practices that Dollar Jigme Khalsang was doing for many years was called the Chod practice. Chod is a Tibetan word, and in English it's spelt C-H-O-D, so like Chod, but actually it's pronounced Ch. And in the Chod practice, I'm not going to run through the whole practice, although Vasantra does. In the Chod practice, it's an imaginative practice where the practitioner lets go of identification with the body, lets go of attachment, but more than attachment, even identification with the physical body. And instead, in this sort of visual, imaginative journey that unfolds in the practice, instead, consciousness is liberated from the body, and it's liberated in the form of a darkini, who's a female figure made of light, normally red light, dancing in the sky, naked, adorned with bone ornaments, ecstatic, blissful, and not without a touch of fierceness. And she represents, I mean, in a way, that's what is it? It's a crude way of putting it. One of the Darkini's qualities is, as it were, the energy, the freedom and the bliss of the enlightened mind that goes beyond all conventional norms and assumptions. You know, she's naked and clad, well, adorned with bone. In her hand, she sometimes holds an implement for chopping, a Vajra chopper that chops bodies. And she's drinking blood and from a skull cup. And the blood is well, it's blood, but it's also nectar, the nectar of immortality, ambrosia. She's drinking blood. So not a conventional image. And he spent years meditating on these figures, of this figure, you could say, of the Darkini, imagining that his consciousness was liberated from the body and transformed into the Darkini. And then in the practice, you not only sort of imagine that the body is no longer you, the body is now just lifeless flesh. The Darkini too goes further and chops your body up and puts it into a cauldron that then becomes nectar for all beings. So you offer your body, your life, up to all beings. So Dollar Jigme Khalsang would have been a Chod practitioner for years, imagining himself not identified in his physical form, his consciousness liberated, and the physical body being there just for the service of others. And so anyway, that's the background to, you could say, to his views. That's how Dollar Jigme Khalsang would have related to the world, to his experience, to other people. Anyway, he comes into this village in China, so he's no longer on retreat. He's got some disciples now. He's probably a revered figure. They're passing through this village in China, and there's this crowd in the market square, and there's this weird excitement that is rather unpleasant. And as I was saying on Tuesday, what becomes really evident is that something awful is taking place. And what's happening is that a man is being tied to an iron horse, or as Vasantra tells it, a copper horse. So this huge life-size copper or iron metal horse, and a man is being tied onto it. So he's riding, but he's strapped on, and he's screaming. in desperation and fear. Sweat is pouring down his face, and he's begging for mercy. And what becomes apparent to Dola Jigme Khalsang is that this horse is no ordinary horse. It's an instrument of torture, of death, in that the belly of the horse is hollow, and what they are, it's stacked with firewood. So the wood is going to be set ablaze. A fire is going to heat the metal to scorching temperatures that will then slowly torture and kill this man. And of course, what Dola Jigme Khalsang does is take the man's place. He says to the guards, to the police, the authorities, whoever there are, he says, it was me, because he ascertains the man is being punished for being a thief. And Jigme Khalsang says, no, it was me. It was me that was the thief. In a way, he lies. From a early Buddhist perspective, he breaks the speech precept of telling the truth in order to serve a higher purpose. And it's as if he cannot bear to see this man suffer. And a stranger, this is a stranger, remember, to him. He cannot bear it. And the only thing that in that moment he can think of doing is to take his place. And that's what happens. The authorities say, okay, well, if you did it, sort of they look at him as to why didn't you say so earlier, because we nearly killed the wrong man. What are you doing? They tie him to the horse, and one of the executioners comes with a firebrand and lights the flames under Dola Jigme Khalsang, who sits there in complete equanimity and dignity, and with a noble, upright bearing, in samadhi, in meditation, in profound, concentrated, transcendental meditation, looking at the sky, up at the sky in front of him. And you can imagine that this form of death, this form of execution, isn't quick. And he sits there apparently unmoving, dignified, upright all the time until he dies. So I'm not going to repeat other things that I said on Tuesday. I did talk about how, from a Buddhist perspective, it's not martyrdom. It's not martyrdom in that it's not based on some sort of dogmatic view that he should do this. There's nothing in Buddhism that tells you must give up your life for, die for others. And there's nothing in Buddhism that says that if you do that, you'll be rewarded in some afterlife. There's nothing in Buddhism that says that such, because after all, your Buddhism is about non-violence, and you're doing violence, you're allowing violence to be done to yourself. So you don't do that lightly. It's not that Buddhism encourages martyrdom in the way that other religions, theistic religions, might. Nor is it coming from self-hatred, nor is it coming from a death wish. Dola Jigme Khalsang would have been full of positivity. So what I want to look at is the view of his life, and view is a bit of an inadequate term. I want to try and sort of explore Dola Jigme Khalsang's perspective, what it would have been like. Because I believe Dola Jigme Khalsang, if he wasn't enlightened, he might have been enlightened. I believe he must have been a very, very advanced being. So what is that perspective? What would it look like from the inside? So one of the things perhaps I want to say to start off with is that Buddhism treats our views very, very seriously, because what it says is that our views create our world. Our views create our world. They're not innocent little thoughts. Some of our views are not even conscious. They're held sort of underneath the level of consciousness, but they nevertheless create our world. And then we live in that world, and we act according to those views. So I want to explore that. Maybe I'll try and do it fairly briefly in three ways. So first of all, there's psychological views that shape our world. And hopefully this is fairly easy to understand. If I have a view that I'm unlovable, that everybody dislikes me, yeah, you know, you can extrapolate from that. If I have that sort of view, from a psychological perspective, that's how I'll experience the world, most likely. It's likely that I'll be rather defended and standoffish in relation to people, expecting them to dislike me. And then that very behavior creates the response that confirms the view. And I mean, that's a very simplistic example, and of course it's much more sophisticated, but you can tell at a psychological level that our views about ourselves govern our experience and how we see the world. That goes not just for views about ourselves, but, you know, political views that we have about other people. Everybody's out to get me. The world is full of, you know, power-hungry, greedy people who are out to get me, or something, will shape my world. Or the world is a benevolent place where there's good in everybody, and I'm trusting and open to that. Another view that will have a very different, create a very different experience of the world. But then there's a deeper, so that's fairly easy to understand, I think, although easier said than unraveled. I mean, what I mean is that if we do suffer from unhelpful psychological views that cause more suffering for ourselves and maybe for those around us, that's what I mean by unhelpful. If we do suffer from that, it's not the work of a day to untangle them. You know, perhaps a large part of our Dharma practice will be learning to, first of all, make those views conscious to ourselves, and then try not to be so under their sway, not to believe them so much. Anyway, I'm not going to be able to unpack how we might do that. But I want to move on to another sort of way that views shape our reality. So I was now thinking of our perceptual experience. So this isn't what you might normally call view, but it comes under this term, drishti, in Buddhism. So, you know, we have senses, sense experience through all of our senses. And it appears to our senses that the world is full of solid, objectively existing objects and people, and beings like animals, that are separate and out there from me. That's how our senses experience things. On the canvas of an objectively existing three-dimensional space that stretches out in all three directions, and which unfolds according to some sort of linear time, past, present, future. Anyway, that's a kind of common sense view that comes from our perceptual experience. But what Buddhism says is actually it's an interpretation. Our raw sense data, the raw sense data that comes through the eyes, ears, nose, etc., to the consciousness, or the consciousness, or even to the brain, our raw data doesn't look like that. After all, when you're listening to me, you're hearing something which is vibrations of air somehow from your speakers. Somehow it's traveled actually from the microphone in front of me down some wires over, I don't understand, I'm out of my depth, over the internet, to your device, computer, through its speakers. That it traveled not as sound, but as electrical impulses and signals. The speakers decode that, but even then, it's just vibrations of air, the molecules. If we were in a vacuum, if you were on the moon, you wouldn't hear me because there'd be no air. So vibrations of air that then cause vibrations in our ears, in our eardrums, that then create more electrical signals that then interpreted by the brain, causing more brain functions that then somehow consciousness, whatever consciousness is, interprets as sound. And what's more, because I'm assuming you can speak English, these sounds mean something in a shared way. All of that is magical. It's not common sense. It's closer to magic. Our perceptual experience is not straightforward. Last night I was, Seb and I, Seb who's being one of the tech team, we listened and watched to The Encounter, which if you've not seen is still available. It was a play at the Barbican a few years ago that they're live streaming for a few more days. And The Encounter tells a story of, it's a true story. I mean, it's a very immersive experience listening, watching to this play, but I can't go into that. The story is of a man, an American called Loren McIntyre, who was a National Geographic photographer, finds himself lost in the Amazon jungle in Brazil, comes across a tribe of people called the Maya Runa and lives amongst them. Basically, he gets lost and he's adopted, as it were, by the tribe. That's just the surface of the story. The story is immensely rich and imaginative. But what I want to touch on is that the Maya Runa, who still exist in the Amazonian jungle, they don't have the same concept of time as we do. And the story makes much of that. They do not see time in terms of a linear line. I mean, they certainly don't have clock time because they don't have watches, but their whole notion of time is different. What's more, and this is how the story is told, what Loren finds is that he and the chief of the tribe that he calls Barnacle can communicate telepathically. Barnacle can communicate with Loren mind to mind. And it's apparently that, or at least Barnacle, but that tribe, they call that mind to mind communication the first language. And they haven't lost touch with it. So their perception of reality is very, very different. You could say they've got different senses to ours. They also do shamanic rituals and have very, very different experiences. Anyway, perception is not as straightforward as we think. We create our world through our views. Yes, there's sense input, and then we create our world. I want to then move on to another type, which goes deeper still, which is a deeply instinctive, intuitive sense that the world is real, that we are real and the world is real, that it's solid and touchable and tangible, real. And, having studied physics, I know that modern physics wouldn't be so simplistic. It might talk about real, but then what it ends up with is so weird. The world for physicists is described more as patterns of unfolding energy that sometimes unfold in forms that are constantly ephemeral, and there's no solidity there. But also what physics is fascinatingly implying, at least some interpretations of quantum theory imply, is that those patterns of energy don't objectively have an objective existence, that the forms that they take are in part created by the act of observation and by the so-called subject. One physicist said, we live in a participatory universe. We create the universe. Now, for me, that resonates much, not the detail of physics, but those broad concepts resonate with the Dharma very deeply, that the world is not as we think it is, and also we are not as we think we are. This sense of a separate, objective or subjective, separate kind of being, fixed being, in a real world that's out there, independent of observation. The Dharma says that's just not true. And that is the view, the deepest view, that causes us to be unenlightened, causes us ultimately all our suffering, all our dissatisfaction, all our struggles. It sort of causes what we know of as human life, in a sense. And at times when we can, I think it's not uncommon to have a glimpse of breaking free of that. Sometimes it happens in nature for people. Sometimes it happens when you're looking at art or culture or listening to music, or sometimes it happens when you have a deep communication with somebody. For example, even that telepathic experience that Lauren McIntyre experienced, I don't think it's that uncommon. I don't think it is just the Maya Runa. I think human beings are capable of realizing that consciousness is not just some sort of physical phenomena locked in some sort of cage of the body. You know, if we go on retreat, our sense of time changes. I can remember an experience on my solitary when I was sort of up on a cliff at the sort of highest point of the valley that I was in. So I was about 900 meters up, maybe 1,000 meters up by then, and looking down at this beautiful panorama. I could see for miles over the Mediterranean towards Greece, I guess, and Italy and Greece. And these swifts were doing their flypasts right by me. You know, whoosh would be, I mean, from nowhere. They're just, I mean, ever so, I mean, they're so beautifully named. They were just, and for a while, I felt I was flying with them. I knew what it was like. Knew isn't the right word. I felt I was flying with them. I felt the ecstasy of flight. Just because I was on retreat, I'd been meditating a lot. It was, I think my preconceptions about my world were starting to soften. And there was this, all I can say is there was this sort of sense of being at one with the swift. I know that sounds cheesy. That was what the experience was like. Anyway, if we practice the Dharma, if we practice meditation, we're likely to have glimpses of loosening of our normal conceptual worldview. Now, none of this would be, I'm going to talk for a little bit more, and then we're going to meditate. And then we'll have a break and I'll carry on talking. None of this would be a problem if it wasn't for suffering, I think. If like we were happily deluded, you could say arguably, you could say, so what? You could say that. Personally, actually, from a young age, I've wanted to know what the mystery of existence is. So I'm positively, even when I wasn't suffering, I haven't had a huge amount of suffering in my life, not at a ordinary level, not compared to most or many people. But I have had this curiosity that wants to penetrate into the truth of things, wants to know what's going on. But yes, many people, most of us, and I include myself at times, there's a real sense of lack. There's a sense of this isn't enough. And we're somehow not living the life that we should be living. That is a sort of suffering. Of course, there's far more, what's the word? Gross forms of suffering, including physical pain. And, right now, many people, as we know, are in states of extreme physical suffering, starvation, for example. And the physical pain, as long as we've got a body, we're going to be subject to. But what the Dharma teaches us is that all mind-made pain comes from this deluded view or deluded views. And it's optional. And even the physical pain, if our view was different, if we were like Lama Jigme, I think even the physical pain would be, we wouldn't add to it. It would just be, whatever that means, physical pain. We wouldn't add to it with fear, with anxiety, with aversion. Lama Jigme seems to have just endured pain mindfully and not added to it. And his mind seems to have risen above it, even though his body was in what anybody would call agony. So it's really worth, what I'm trying to say is it's really worth engaging with how do we transform our views? Because we're creating our world from our views, and we're acting from our views, and we're causing ourselves and people around us unnecessary pain because of our views. So you couldn't say there's anything more important in life. You couldn't say that. And I want to really stress that, because sometimes when we talk about the Dharma, and I do this myself, what we emphasize, quite rightly in a sense, is metta, is its kindness. And we say, look, the Dharma is about love and kindness. And it is, in a sense, but not in the sense that we might think it is. It's not about love as we ordinarily, you and I, unenlightened beings, normally experience the word, or even about metta in that sense. All of that is just a means to a much, much more radical, incredible goal. And that goal is unimaginable, because it releases a whole new dimension of consciousness. And it only does that when we somehow let go of the deluded views. Yeah. And then, yes, there will be a liberated love, but from the basis of wisdom. So Buddhism differentiates between helpful views and unhelpful views. Helpful views are often called right view, but I prefer the word helpful, and unhelpful views are often called wrong views. Yeah? But maybe I'll stick with helpful and unhelpful. And unhelpful views tighten the delusion. They strengthen the delusion. They strengthen our ignorance, and then they, as a result, strengthen our self-centeredness that keeps us in this prison of separateness. Helpful views loosen us from the bonds, and they start to penetrate the delusion. So I found, literally by chance, I was just flicking through the flip chart in the shrine room. We've got a flip chart as a sort of prompt, and I was flicking through it to see if I could find something that I wrote down on Tuesday, and I couldn't find it. But what I did find was some words that Subhuti writes about helpful views. So I'm going to read that out. It seems too much of a sort of coincidence to not read it out. So he's talking about right view, helpful view. Okay, so I'm going to read. A right view is an interpretation that is in accordance with reality. So that's what I've been trying to emphasize. That allows faith to flourish. So that's lovely, isn't it? Views already, Subhuti's saying, if it's helpful, our hearts will open into Shraddha. If this view isn't allowing faith to flourish, if it's undermining Shraddha, then we know that we're on the wrong track. That thus transcending ego identity and giving a way of attending to experience that guides actions that bring increasing happiness to the agent and others. So giving a way of attending to experience that guides actions that bring increasing happiness to the agent and others. So views guide our actions and sets up tendencies that liberate from the cycle of existence. And sets up tendencies that liberate from the cycle of existence. Those tendencies are, well, what Subhuti has in mind are something that he calls, and Bhante has called, Bhante Sangharakshita has called, Dharma Niyama processes. These tendencies are tendencies that arise naturally in the universe when we penetrate, when we start to penetrate into the way things are, when we really start to see the way things are, these tendencies in the universe start to operate through us. And how you might experience those tendencies is as a knowing that the Dharma is true, and as a straightforward, much more straightforward, wholehearted urge to practice the Dharma for the benefit of all beings. So that's what Lama Jigme Khalsang, those tendencies must have been really alive in him. So I'm just read it again one more time, this definition. A right view, helpful view, is an interpretation that is in accordance with reality, that allows faith to flourish, thus transcending ego identity, and giving a way of attending to experience that guides actions that bring increasing happiness to the agent and others, and sets up tendencies that liberate from the cycle of existence. What wonderful, wonderful, succinct way of putting it. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for, in a way, this first half. I want to say a bit more, maybe, yeah, not too much more, a little bit more, and then we'll have a chance for some questions in the second half. But for now, I'd like us to meditate, at least for a little bit, and I'll guide us in a period of sitting, and then we'll have a short tea break. So setting yourselves up comfortably on a chair, on the sofa, maybe on your meditation gear. You might want to turn away from the screen. You might even want to face your shrine. And we'll be sitting for about 15 minutes. Maybe beginning with a few deeper breaths. And bringing your awareness into the body. Noticing any sounds around you, my voice and any other sounds you can hear. Trying to let them be there without getting caught up in them or without pushing them away. They're just sound, whatever sound is, and we don't really know. And really feeling the weight of the body falling through the lower half of the body, the points of contact with your seat and with the ground. Letting the earth take your weight. Imagining the legs becoming soft, the muscles in the thighs and calves loosening. Letting go in the legs. And also softening your face. The brow becoming smooth. The eyes sinking back into their sockets. All the muscles around the eyes softening. And the mouth and jaw also relaxing. And as the face softens, imagining any areas of tension in the body also softening, the tension just melting away into the ground. Checking areas where you might habitually hold on, the shoulders, the belly, and the chest. Filling the whole body with awareness, with a sense of spaciousness. And noticing how your heart is, what the emotional tone of your experience is. Just noticing it with gentle, patient awareness. And seeing if you can have a sense of spaciousness, not just in the body, but also in the mind. Perhaps even a sense of vastness. Sense of openness in body, heart, and mind. And just sitting in that spaciousness. If the mind wanders, keep coming back to the sensations in the body. If you want to, the sensations of the breath. Or you can just sit in spacious awareness. If you now are making any effort, see if you can let go of trying to do anything and just sit. No one can wear the jewel of reality except the one in whose fire it was born. I have a friend who wears such a jewel on his forehead. Our foreheads touch tonight, and mine burns. Okay, very good. So we're going to have a break now until 8:10, and in the break, we've got a very special treat because David is going to be playing his accordion to us when he's set himself up. So do go off and get yourself a drink, and then do try and come back to catch something of David's playing. Good. And I'll see you in about 10 minutes or so. Thank you very, very, very much to David for just a delightful, delightful performance. It sort of lifts the whole evening, doesn't it? Somehow, very, very lovely. Thank you very, very much, David. Very lovely to see and to hear. And while I'm sort of saying thank you, I do want to say sort of thank you. Well, as you've heard, there's my whole community here tonight, but also there's so many people who are helping to run this retreat. Maybe 24 people who behind the scenes are doing the technical work, doing the organizing, facilitating groups, making it very, very easy for those of us leading the retreat and being up front. Very, very easy for us to just turn up and do our bit. But behind the scenes, there's a real quite complex operation going on, and I just feel very grateful to all of the team. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. Okay, so I'm hoping you're feeling refreshed by David's beautiful music. And I want to say a few more things to conclude what I wanted to say, and then we'll see what questions you have. So if you have got questions, you can just be putting them in the chat, and Hippolyte will ask them. Okay, so helpful and unhelpful views. We've looked a little bit at what a helpful view is, setting up these tendencies that liberate from cyclic existence, that allows faith to flourish, that transcends our ego identity. So you could say that our practice needs to include, our Dharma practice needs to include what's called wisdom practice. Practice where we're trying to transform our views so that they are more helpful, more true. And so wisdom practice is traditionally consists of, first of all, hearing, and that would include reading, and at least conceptually understanding what Buddhism says about the nature of reality, what right view would be, the fact that we're not fixed entities in a fixed objective world, that there's something more of a co-creation of experience that is always in flux, and without any solid centers to anything, any real identities, anything to grasp. So it's about trying to understand that more and more clearly, because although I've just sort of said those words, it's so counterintuitive, this, that we really need to keep coming back to reflecting on it. In a way, that's the second level of wisdom, the second sort of level of wisdom practice, which is to reflect and really test in our experience, like, is that true? Do I really believe that there's no fixed center to me, that my sense of me that I grip onto is just a delusion, that gripping is based on a delusion? Do I really believe that? Surely there's a real separate, fixed me. That's how it feels. Otherwise, why would I be so upset when things don't go my way? Why am I frightened when my health or security is threatened? Why do I cling to life and at all costs fear death? What is it that I'm trying to protect? If there's no fixed essence there, why does it feel like there is? So really test that, reflect on that. Is it true, or is Buddhism deluded? Is the world out there? Surely the world out there is as it appears to be. There's lots of solid objects. You know, what's it mean to say that everything's fluid and empty of intrinsic existence? Surely a bus, you wouldn't want to walk out in front of it. It feels really solid if it touches you. So what is Buddhism getting at? Is it just missing the obvious? Anyway, reflect, really reflect. And if I had time tonight, I'd help you reflect. But reflection is often best done in smaller groups and in conversation, in dialogue, and on one's own. But the third level of wisdom practice is where it sort of transcends being a practice, where it becomes a realization. What happens is that intellectual understanding and that deeper reflection, based on, particularly on meditative concentration and absorption, it's like the penny drops at times, and a realization dawns that is beyond words, and yet it is a knowing, but it's a wordless knowing. The analogy of seeing is a good analogy, but of course it is only an analogy. But seeing is so direct and immediate. What you see, appears to be so real. So it's a sort of wordless, direct knowing. And if the penny drops deeply enough, that sort of knowing is accompanied by a sense of freedom and release and bliss and possibly love. If you let it drop deeply enough, the heart opens. It's a heart knowing. And normally what's said to happen is that those moments of insight, as they're sometimes called, arrive in flashes of lightning. They're brief. They illuminate our world, our awareness. And in that illuminated world, everything is transformed. There's a sort of, I finally get it. It's obvious. But then the world darkens again. It's sort of normally it's brief, at least to begin with. But with continued practice, what's said to happen is that those flashes of lightning occur more and more frequently. And with the birth of enlightenment, it's said that the flashes just become one continuous light. The light of wisdom shines in a way that is then, and you have no chance of falling back into darkness. Prajna. Jnana dawns, prajna is an abiding sense of non-dual wisdom. And in that wisdom, it's like, it's said to be like, there's a field of awareness. There is awareness. There is still perception. So you would still see colors and shapes and hear sounds, and it's not like our senses are completely transformed, although the senses are said to be heightened. Everything looks more vivid. Everything is colors are heightened, sounds are heightened, smells are heightened. It's a heightened perception, but there's a sort of beyond the immediate sense perceptions. There's also other experiences. For example, it's said that there's a sense that everything is pulsing with life, not just the animals and other people, but the whole world is pulsing with the energy of life. And it's pulsing through us, and it's pulsing through everything. And in this field of awareness, it doesn't make sense to privilege the experience that I call me, this pulsing sense of pulsing, what's the word? Condensation of energy that I call me. It doesn't make sense to privilege that arising from any other arising around us. There is just pulsing, vibrating condensations of energy that are constantly interacting, forming each other, and dissolving into the void. So from that perspective, yes, there's still physical sensation, but it's said that the enlightened being would no longer identify with even the physical sensations of one's own body. Any sense of identification with this, with oneself, would have gone. And if there is identification, you could say it's an identification with everything. There's no privileged position. There's not even a boundary that's experienced between an inner world of thoughts and feelings and ideas and images and an outer world of objects. Everything is seen to be of the nature of transient experience. Inside and outside doesn't make any sense. Self and other, that distinction is seen to be just a deluded, clumsy kind of an illusion. It's said that at that level, because this realization is non-conceptual, it's with the whole being, it's said that there are no views, not even helpful ones. There is just reality unfolding. And there's nothing more that can be said. Any concept, even to say reality, and even to say unfolding, and is, and there, is to falsify the thing, which is not the thing. It's just a non-conceptual, fluid, blissful liberation. So no views. You transcend even helpful views. You can't jump to that without helpful views. So for us, for me, for most of us, I presume, I need helpful views, and I need the structures of the path and the practice and the meta practice, my ethical practice, everything. But all of that is only a means to an end, and the end transcends any designation. And that's wisdom. That's wisdom. And it's that, surely, that, well, yesterday, Maitreya Bandhu was talking about the meaning of life. And I think that non-conceptual, transcendent experience is, well, it even maybe transcends the words meaning and life, but it is what is our truest nature. And then to come back to the beginning, it's not only that there's a liberation from suffering for oneself, it's as if there's a force of compassion, of love that comes through one. You can't even say it's one's own. You can't say it's my will or your will, or it's a force that transcends categorization like mine or yours or personal or impersonal. But it will feel like it's a force that sort of enters from outside into one. And yet it doesn't, it's not like Invasion of the Body Snatchers where you feel you're not in control. It's like you willingly let this force of compassion guide your actions. And Lama Jigme Galzan must have been in touch with this force that transcended himself. And when he saw this man about to die the most agonizing death, I doubt if there was much sort of conceptual weighing up of whether it was a good thing for him to sacrifice himself for this stranger or not. I doubt if that was going on. I mean, who knows what was going on? It's beyond me. But it seems that somehow Jigme Galzan allowed the universe, the divine, the Buddhas, to just come through him. And what was most appropriate in that moment was to exchange places with this other man. Because for Lama Jigme Galzan, his serenity, his equanimity couldn't be disturbed, even in the face of excruciating physical pain and the death of the body. That wasn't so much to give up for him. So for me, I just feel, well, I do forget. I forget more than I remember sometimes. But it does feel like, at least when I remember, this feels like the only thing worth dedicating life, my life, to realizing. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. At least leave talking at you, as it were, and see if you've got any questions. And we've got a little time for questions, and then we're going to finish with a threefold puja. So, Ippolita, are there questions?
Yes, we do have questions. There are two questions that are probably linked, so I'm going to bundle them up. So Anna asks, although the concept of no fixed self both appeals and makes sense, I find it quite scary. How can we navigate this fear while making progress? And Svadi asks if you could please say something about the importance of having a positive sense of self before maybe letting go.
Well, let's take Anna's thing first. I'm not sure I'll mix them up. I might take them separately. So fear, it does feel scary. At least at times, it can feel scary. This sense of letting go of our delusion of a fixed and separate self, letting go of our identification with the body, letting go of an identification with everything I think of as me. That does feel scary, at least in the abstract. In practice, particularly if you practice metta and ethical practice, acts of generosity and kindness, and if you practice shraddha, if you can keep connecting with the positive that lies beyond this death of the delusion, then, as I was saying on Tuesday, it doesn't have to be scary. One text that I was quoting on Tuesday is like the death of the delusion, and after all, it is only the delusion that dies. There is no me that really dies. It's a delusion that dies. The death of the delusion is said to be as smooth and easy as the melting of butter in barley soup. I love that sort of melting of the delusion. And as the delusion melts, the heart opens. So there's so much love and bliss and positivity that arises that you just want to go with the melting. It's a bit like somebody saying to you, I don't know, just dive into the pool of water on a hot day, and if you don't know how to swim, that would be a scary thing. But if you do know how to swim, I don't know, you're just in water and you can let go. Or imagine letting go on a cold day into a warm bath. I guess kids don't always like to get into the bath, but as adults, actually I don't have a bath and we don't have a bath in our community, but it'd be lovely, wouldn't it, just to get into a warm bath and let go of all the stress of stuff. And it's blissful. So that's what wisdom, the arising of wisdom and the letting go of the delusion is like, at least if you practice with metta and shraddha. And Swadi's point about saying something about the development of a positive sense of self, I'm not going to say too much, Swadi, because this retreat is what we've been looking at is the whole system of practice. And I guess what I'm talking about is spiritual death and rebirth. And it is premised on integration and positive emotion. You're completely right, Swati, that without integration and a positive, healthy sense of self, it's very, very hard and probably not even, certainly I wouldn't force it to let go of a sense of me. What I would say is, though, that you still have to, it's still worth practicing wisdom on a conceptual level and even reflecting. That's really worth doing. Even though I'm not perfectly integrated and perfectly emotionally positive, it's still worth doing. But you also, I think it's good to have guides. It's good to have friends who know you and know when to say, look, never mind about not self and all that stuff. Just work on your metta bhavana. A friend might say that, and if they say that, that's because they're getting at something. It is very individual when it's appropriate to take on these practices and how intensely to practice them. So yeah, thank you, Anna, and thank you, Swati. Yeah.
Emma asks, when do we know when we've had a glimpse of realization of truth as opposed to just imaginary experiences?
I think you'll know. Part of the realization is a sense of knowing that this is the truth, accompanies the realization. Now, I guess it helps, though, if you've been studying and reflecting on the Dharma, because it is possible, I don't know if this was the angle of your question, but it is possible to get deluded and think we've seen enlightenment or reality or whatever, when actually we haven't yet. or we've seen a bit of it, or we've seen it a bit, and there's further to go. This is a danger, I think, for all of us practicing, that some peak experiences can happen, and it's very easy to think they're partial, but it's very easy to think that they're complete. Like, now I'm enlightened. And actually, there's always further to go. Wisdom doesn't, it's not like you get there and then you stop. It's endless, this exploration. This non-conceptual realization isn't an end point. It's beautifully, it just opens up into more and more dimensions. So it's worth checking. It's worth checking with what the Dharma teaches to see if it matches with your experience. So, for example, you might have a peak experience, not you, Emma, but somebody might have some sort of peak experience and then think that they're God, or they've been touched by the hand of God. Well, if that's the case, they've misread Buddhism. And so it's worth checking with scripture, as it were. And it's worth seeing whether it's led to a softening of self-centeredness. If it hasn't led to a softening of self-centeredness, of pride, of egotism, of, I don't know, selfishness. If it hasn't, then it's probably not wisdom. Yeah. And if it has, then you're probably on the right track. I'm told that in the Tibetan tradition, even you get it checked out. You go to some teacher who is further down the path than you are, and you have it checked out. And we don't always do that in Triratna, but you can talk to people in Triratna. It's not formal, but you can talk to people, and people that you look up to and say, look, how does this sound? And normally in the Tibetan tradition, I'm told that if it is a wisdom experience, the standard sort of response of the teacher, I'm told this, I don't know much about Tibetan Buddhism, is something like, yes, you're on the right track, and there's further to go. So don't stop practicing. There's always further to go. Enlightenment isn't an end point. Anyway, I've sort of talked around your question, Emma. I don't know whether I've answered it or not. I hope I've said something helpful anyway. Good. Let's take one or two more.
Yeah, so Predrag asks, do you think there is a direct correlation between education and wisdom, or another way to say it, could science bring us to wisdom?
Who asked that?
Predrag from Belgrade.
Predrag. Yeah. Hi there, Predrag. I hope I pronounced that right. Is there a link between education and wisdom? And can science lead us to wisdom? The immediate response I have, and I probably want to qualify, is no. That the Buddha was probably illiterate. 2,500 years ago, there wouldn't have been a conception of science as we understand it. So from many perspectives, for us, from our perspective, the Buddha was ignorant of much that we take for granted. So you could say that there's no real link between knowledge, education, knowledge, science, progress, and wisdom. In fact, you could even say that our sophistication, our technological sophistication, I mean, it's fantastic because I can now speak to you and you can speak to me and da-da-da. So it's great. Don't want to knock it, and it's brought lots of benefits, but it's also brought a great deal of complexity into our lives. I know that for many people, this lockdown has been terrible, is difficult, and then particularly if you're ill or you're worried about other loved ones. Some people I know have been bereaved, so I'm not wanting to brush over that. But for some of us, I've also heard that this lockdown has been a period of simplifying one's life, and that has brought a greater degree of fulfillment. So all I'm saying is that in our modern, complex, technological, educated, Western, scientific world, many of us live very strained lives that where our heads are completely full and there's no time for wisdom. Yeah, so that's a sobering thought. Yeah, so no, you don't need a PhD in shunyata to gain enlightenment. Yeah, thank you.
So
One more? Yeah, let's have one more.
So, I mean, very linked to what you just said, Colin asks, why do we forget more than we remember, even if we believe it's true?
Yes.
How do we keep remembering?
Is that Colin or Colleen?
Colin.
Colleen. I had to check Hippolyte's French accent between your chat questions and Hippolyte and me. There's quite a lot of gulf, isn't there? Anyway, thank you, Hippolyte. He's just made a delicious banana bread that I've got waiting for me upstairs, so I can't tease him too much. Why do we forget more than we remember, even though we know that it's true? Is that right? Even though we know it's true? Because I think what happens is that this instinct to hang on to this sense of me as a fixed and separate entity is so deep in us. I believe it's as deep as what we would call the survival instinct. That millions of years of evolution has bred into us a survival instinct, which is predicated on a sense of separate selfhood. It's an evolutionary nature's trick to get us to survive. And in a sense, it's worked. We have survived. We've thrived as a species. But it's a trick that is based on a delusion. And so our survival as human beings has human consciousness, as it were, has a ceiling on it, or it has veils in front of it that keep us trapped. So yeah, we physically survive and procreate and live, survive, exist, but at a cost of being trapped in a deluded, confined consciousness. So it goes very, very deep, this survival instinct. A traditional Buddhist answer, which is like an alternative way of thinking about it, is that we've had countless lifetimes where this delusion has been the driving force of our life. And we're born into this lifetime with the momentum of that delusion built up in countless other lifetimes. And it takes a heck of a lot of unseating. And conceptual knowledge won't really unseat it very much at all. So my head might know that the Dharma is true, but that doesn't really count for very much when it comes it comes to the crunch. Hopefully my heart knows it a little, but even the heart forgets. Somehow my entire being, at the deepest possible level of mind, of consciousness, of being, needs to be convinced, and it will only be convinced when it has a glimpse of what lies beyond the limited consciousness. So we're slightly in a catch-22 situation, because we're stuck in this deluded consciousness, and we're at the deepest possible level not convinced that that's a bad thing. And the only thing that really convinces us is when we experience something beyond that deluded consciousness. But in order to get beyond that deluded consciousness, normally we have to practice really, really hard. So do you see the catch-22 of the Dharma life? We're not convinced, and yet the only thing that will convince us is a real experience. And to get that, most of us have to practice pretty hard. So, it's a human predicament. Maybe that's a good note to end on. So sorry if I didn't answer your question. There's so much more to say, isn't there? Anyway, you wouldn't want to go on all night, but I was going to say that it would be nice to. But what I'd like us to do shortly is conclude with a threefold puja, because puja is part of wisdom practice. This it's an education for the heart puja. It's the heart gradually, drop by drop by drop, realizing, I'm mixing my metaphors, aren't I? Anyway, realizing the truth of the Dharma. As I say, the intellect alone doesn't have much purchase without the heart. So puja's, you could say, wisdom practice, as is metta bhavana, as the mindfulness of breathing can be, as is generosity, etc. It can be anyway. But before we do the puja, I just want to say a few things about, a few things. So soon, after this retreat finishes Sunday morning, so do stay till Sunday morning, do come to things tomorrow. Tomorrow evening, we're going to have a final, Maitreya Bandhu is going to do a poetry evening, which I think is also a wisdom practice. Although I tend not to say that when he hears me in his hearing, because anyway, never mind. But he's heard me now. Poetry can be a wisdom practice. He'll be doing an evening of poetry, and then I'll be leading us in a sevenfold puja tomorrow night. And Sunday morning, we'll have our final concluding session of the retreat. So do come for that. Anyway, soon, from the 2nd of June, Maitreya Bandhu is going to be doing a Life with Full Attention course. It's going to be twice a week, a Tuesday and a Friday morning, 10 a.m. I don't know much more about it. Look out for that. Somebody's going to post a link soon telling you how to register and sign up for it. And the last thing I want to say is, well, first of all, thank you to all of you who've been giving so generously. You've been giving money very, very generously. I've been very touched and moved by your generosity. And I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to ask for more dana. So if you can continue giving, or if you haven't given, consider giving money to really enable the center to continue flourishing. I think we're flourishing spiritually. We're flourishing in a way that we've never done before. We're reaching more people than we've never done before. But financially, by golly, flourishing isn't the word we'd use. The treasurer wouldn't. Flourishing is not the word we'd use. So if you can give, it would really, really help us at a time when, we really need money. So we're suggesting an amount, very boldly. Subhadramati suggested an amount for participating in this retreat, which you're completely free to participate without giving. It is a free retreat, but a suggested amount of donation of dana was £100. So I'm just going to drop that into your receptive psyches. £100, £100, £100. I've said it 3 times, like a mantra. Okay, so we'll settle down for a threefold puja. So in the threefold puja, as we've been doing, we're going to hear the words of the Buddha from the Dhammapada, the first 6 verses of the Dhammapada. Matt is going to read the first 6 verses of the Dhammapada to begin with. I'll settle us down, and then I'll turn to Matt, and he'll read those 6 verses. He's going to come closer so that the microphone will pick him up, and then he'll read those 6 verses. Then we'll recite the puja in call and response, the 3 verses. Then I'll lead us in the Shakyamuni mantra. And here we'll make offerings. And at home, I'd really urge you to make offerings to your shrine, if you can. And then we'll let the mantra fade away, and then I'll ring the concluding bell. Good. So settling back into a meditative posture.
Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows, even as the cartwheel follows the hoof of the ox drawing the cart. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows, like a shadow that never departs. Those who entertain such thoughts as, they abused me, they beat me, they conquered me, they robbed me, will not still their hatred. Those who do not entertain such thoughts as, they abused me, they beat me, they conquered me, they robbed me, will still their hatred. Not by hatred are hatreds ever pacified here in the world. They are pacified by love. This is the eternal law. Others do not realize that we are all heading for death. Those who realize it will compose their quarrels.
The Threefold Puja. Opening reverence. We reverence the Buddha,
We reverence the Buddha,
the perfectly enlightened one,
the perfectly enlightened one,
the shower of the way.
the shower of the way.
We reverence the Dharma,
We reverence the Dharma,
the teaching of the Buddha,
the teaching of the Buddha,
which leads from darkness to light.
which leads from darkness to light.
We reverence the Sangha,
We reverence the Sangha,
the fellowship of the Buddha's disciples,
the fellowship of the Buddha's disciples,
that inspires and guides.
that inspires and guides.
Reverence to the Three Jewels. We reverence the Buddha
We reverence the Buddha
and aspire to follow him.
and aspire to follow him.
The Buddha was born
The Buddha was born
as we are born.
as we are born.
What the Buddha overcame,
What the Buddha overcame,
we too can overcome.
we too can overcome.
What the Buddha attained,
What the Buddha attained,
we too can attain.
we too can attain.
We reverence the Dharma
We reverence the Dharma
and aspire to follow it
and aspire to follow it
with body, speech, and mind
with body, speech, and mind
until the end.
until the end.
The truth in all its aspects,
The truth in all its aspects,
the path in all its stages.
the path in all its stages.
We aspire to study,
We aspire to study,
practice,
practice,
realize.
realize.
We reverence the Sangha
We reverence the Sangha
and aspire to follow it.
and aspire to follow it.
The fellowship of those
The fellowship of those
who tread the way.
who tread the way,
As one by one,
as one by one.
we make our own commitment,
We make our own commitment,
an ever widening circle.
an ever widening circle.
The Sangha grows.
The Sangha grows.
Offerings to the Buddha. Reverencing the Buddha,
Reverencing the Buddha,
we offer flowers,
we offer flowers,
flowers that today
flowers that today
are fresh and sweetly blooming,
are fresh and sweetly blooming,
flowers that tomorrow
flowers that tomorrow
are faded and fallen.
are faded and fallen.
Our bodies too,
Our bodies too,
like flowers, will pass away.
will pass away.
Reverencing the Buddha,
Reverencing the Buddha,
we offer candles
we offer candles.
to him who is the light.
To him who is the light,
We offer light
we offer light.
from his greater lamp,
From his greater lamp,
a lesser lamp we light within us,
a lesser lamp we light within us.
the lamp of Bodhi,
The lamp of Bodhi,
shining within our hearts.
shining within our hearts.
Reverencing the Buddha,
reverencing the Buddha,
we offer incense.
we offer incense.
Incense whose fragrance
Incense whose fragrance
pervades the air.
pervades the air.
The fragrance of the perfect life.
The fragrance of the perfect life,
Sweeter than incense.
sweeter than incense,
Spreads in all directions
spreads in all directions
throughout the world.
throughout the world.
Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha. 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 Shakyamuni Swaha. Om Muni Muni Mahamuni 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 Shakyamuni Swaha. Good. So we'll leave it there for this evening. Thank you very, very much for joining me. I hope you have a really good rest of the retreat, and I hope to see you again very, very soon.